This Black Friday, the perfume shop is celebrating with our hottest deals ever. Like Jimmy Choo Flash EDP 60ml for only €30, saving a massive €40 off the RRP. Grab them before they're gone, just in time for Christmas. Offer ends 29th of November, savings off RRP while stocks last. Exclusions apply. For T's and C's, visit us online at theperfumeshop.com/IE.
Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome to part 2 of the Week 12 episode of the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Part 1 was all the Thanksgiving games, or 2 of the 3 Thanksgiving games, since one of them got canceled. There's no teams on bye this week, so we still have another 13 games to go here, so let's jump right into it. Raiders at Falcons. We got Julio Jones dealing with a hamstring injury. He's a game-time decision. I'm sure he's going to play, but how much he plays, I don't know. We're obviously starting Josh Jacobs, but it's a tough matchup for running backs against the Falcons. 3rd fewest rushing yards allowed this year, so I would avoid Josh Jacobs in your daily fantasy lineups. Darren Waller has the best matchup for tight ends this week. Atlanta is tied for the most touchdowns allowed to tight ends. They're 2nd in receiving yards allowed to tight ends, 4th in receptions allowed to tight ends, despite seeing almost exactly the league average in tight end targets. So Waller has to be licking his chops this week. He has 35% of the Raiders' red zone target so far, so you can bet your ass that he's going to be on my tight end touchdown score parlay ticket. Calvin Ridley's a must start. If Julio Jones plays, he's a must start, even if he is beat up. And Nelson Aguilar now has 6 touchdowns this year. His last 5 games have alternated between really good games and really bad games. He's due for another dud here, but I think this is the week that he breaks that trend and at least gives us something. I think this is going to be one of their higher scoring games, one of the higher scoring games of the week. So I think we can start Nelson Aguilar. And then Hayden Hurst, I don't know what to do. Didn't catch either of his 2 targets last week in a top 8 matchup. Todd Gurley, only 26 yards last week as well. So 2 guys that were definitely duds for the Falcons. Next, we got the Chargers at the Bills. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams are both starts. The Bills are as beatable downfield as anybody, so Williams has the same amount of air yards as Will Fuller this year, so he's right there as far as deep threats go, and this rookie quarterback, Justin Herbert, has shown he can be accurate on those deep balls. Hunter Henry has 4 catches in the last 5 of his 6 games. And a touchdown in back-to-back games now. He's got a good matchup with the Bills, 6th most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. They're tied for the 6th most touchdowns allowed to tight ends. I might take a gander at the Donald Parham touchdown scorer prop. The XFL standout. This guy is just massive, and they seem to like him in the red zone. So Stephon Diggs and Zach Moss. The Chargers have given up over 4 yards per carry to both Frank Gore and LaMichael Pirine last week, so Moss should be able to make some plays with the Bills coming off the bye. The Bills tight ends also have a really good matchup here. The Chargers are tied with the Falcons and the Jags for the most touchdowns allowed. If we're going to pick one of these Bills tight ends to score, for me it's going to be Tyler Kroft. Of the 4 Buffalo tight ends, Kroft has the most red zone targets. He has the highest ADOT. He has the most air yards, and he has exactly the same amount of offensive snaps played as the other 3 tight ends combined. So Kroft is definitely the guy most likely to score for the Bills, but I would not be surprised in the slightest bit if he does not and one of the others does. So it's definitely a gamble to take one of these Bills tight ends, but If you're going to play the matchups, this is one of the best matchups, and Croft has the best chance to score. Giants at Bengals, we got Wayne Gallman. The Bengals have allowed the fourth most rushing yards to running back, so I will be taking a peek at Wayne Gallman's rushing yard prop. Darius Slayton has a good shot at hauling in a deep ball or two this week. The Bengals have allowed the third most explosive pass plays to wide receivers. Evan Ingram is another guy with a great tight end matchup. The Bengals have given up the fourth most receiving yards to tight ends. Before his Week 10 dud against the Eagles, Ingram had 29 targets over the 3 games prior, so he was definitely getting involved. But of course, his last game was, it was crap. I don't know if we can start any Bengals now with Joe Burrow out, but if there is anyone that's going to stay involved in the game plan, it's going to be Tyler Boyd. I have Boyd in a couple leagues, and I'm not going to start him unless I absolutely have to until I see how Ryan Finley can keep this offense going with the number one target getter on the offense being Tyler Boyd. All right, Titans at Colts. Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown. I can't believe it, but I think Corey Davis is also a must start. Maybe not must start, but he's a decent play. Has become a real tough decision. No teams on bye this week, so you should have other options, but he had his third 100-plus yard game last week. He's had a touchdown or 100-plus yards now in 5 of his 8 games, and 2 of those 3, he had at least 65 yards on 5 catches. So he's really only had one bad game. He's been pretty damn consistent. So, like I said, Henry, A.J. Brown, and I think Corey Davis for the Titans. And then I think you can also keep jotting out there Jonnu Smith with these 2 teams. When these 2 teams met back in Week 10, the Colts did a really good job containing the Titan tandem of tight ends. But Jonnu Smith is too good to sit, even with all 32 teams in action in Week 12. He did score his 8th touchdown last week against the Ravens, who have been one of the tougher defenses against tight ends. So I think Jonnu is still pretty good. Jonathan Taylor played great in a really good matchup for running backs last week. Actually had more catches than Nyheim Hines as well. So I'm starting him again. Maybe Taylor can replicate the performance of his fellow rookie J.K. Dobbins from last week. I think Hines is still a flex as well. The Titans are in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs, so I think both are safe plays. Although you gotta be thinking, what the heck is the Titans coaching staff doing, or the Colts coaching staff doing, not giving Nyheim Hines more touches after his huge game a couple weeks ago? But that's fantasy football. The Titans have also allowed the third most receiving yards to wide receivers this year, so I think it's time I move Michael Pittman up to the active roster in my Dynasty League. I need a replacement for Kenny Golladay, and I think he's the guy. He's led the Colts in receiving yards for 3 games in a row now. Nyheim Hines got us 31 receiving yards on 3 catches last week, but nothing. He did nothing with his 6 carries. I don't know how the Colts only gave him 6 carries, but that's what they did. It was Week 2 against the Titans when Hines had his 26 fantasy point game. So we'll see what the hell they do with these guys this week. The backfield is a lot like the Rams. They have 3 guys, and we just have no idea who or which one's going to get the bulk of the work. I have Nyheim Hines in a league that I'm in first place, and I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Kareem Hunt as well. So I'm praying to the fantasy gods that I don't have to count on Nyheim Hines, that Clyde and Kareem Hunt can stay healthy. But yeah, it's definitely frustrating. Panthers at the Vikings. Christian McCaffrey still dealing with, I think it's a shoulder or an elbow injury or something. But 88% of P.J. Walker's passes last week went towards one of the 3 wide receivers. So DJ Moore had 11 targets, Curtis Samuel had 10, and Robbie Anderson had 9. Samuel got the touchdown. Moore had the 100-plus yards. All 3 of them caught 7 or 8 passes. So I don't think we have to worry about P.J. Walker being able to support this trio of wide receivers. Plus, they're playing the Vikings with a very beatable secondary, so I'm still starting all 3. I know Robbie Anderson has been somewhat of a disappointment over the past couple weeks, but I'm going to start all 3 of these wide receivers if I have any of them on my team. I'm also starting Mike Davis, 21 touches last week for 79 total yards. We just saw Zeke Elliott have his first 100-plus rushing yard game of the season against the Vikings, so let's fire up Mike Davis for another week, assuming Christian McCaffrey is not playing in this game. And then for the Vikings, you got Dalvin Cook has a great matchup. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson are both must starts as well. But we'll have to keep an eye on Adam Thielen if he's cleared to play. I saw he was added to the Vikings COVID list a couple days ago, so definitely keep your eye on that. Cardinals at the Patriots. We got Rex Burkhead going down last week with a knee injury. Kenyon Drake is not losing work to Chase Edmonds, which is music to my ears because I got Drake in way too many leagues. They also have a good matchup with the Patriots. They're in the top 10 as far as fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think all three Cardinal wide receivers are still starts as well, even though none of them had a big game last week against the worst pass defense in the league in Seattle. Maybe Seattle's starting to turn it around a little bit. But with no Rex Burkhead, Damian Harris should be a good start. But the running back that benefits the most by far from the Burkhead injury, if you ask me, it's James White. The Cardinals are in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, top 10 in receiving yards allowed to wide receivers. They're tied for the 5th most touchdowns allowed to wide receivers and the 4th most receptions allowed to wide receivers. But who the hell are you going to start with any confidence for the Patriots as far as their wide receivers go? You got Jacoby Myers, Damiere Byrd, N'Keal Harry. Byrd had the big game last week with 6 catches on 7 targets for 132 yards and a touchdown, but Jacoby Myers was the most consistent Patriot wide receiver as far as targets go over the last 3 weeks before that game with the Texans. And you got N'Keal Harry, the first wide receiver that the Patriots have drafted in the first round under Bill Belichick in like 16 years or something crazy. The dude's always been banged up. He's always hurt, and I wouldn't be surprised if he emerges over these last 6 games as the guy. So I wouldn't bother starting them unless you absolutely have to, but I will be interested in Cam Newton's props because the Cardinals are 8th in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, 3rd most rushing yards to quarterbacks too. So this Cardinals defense is really starting to fall apart. Plus, Cam has played Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson in the last 2 games, and now he's playing Kyler Murray. That's 3 quarterbacks that probably have all looked up to Cam. When they were in high school and college, Cam had over 350 passing yards last week, so I think Cam can go out and have another really nice game. So, like I said, I'm going to be very interested in Cam Newton's props. The Dolphins at the Jets. Salvin Ahmed had a solid 10 half PPR fantasy points last week. As long as he doesn't have to share with Myles Gaskins and Patrick Laird and Matt Breida. Jordan Howard's no longer on the team, so that's good, but Ahmed should be fine against the Jets. We just don't know who's going to be active for this game and who isn't, so that's definitely going to be something you want to tune in on Sunday morning to see, how many running backs are active. I would start pretty much any of the Thanksgiving Day running backs over Ahmed this week, unless we know by Thursday morning he won't be splitting it with a bunch of guys, but I doubt we'll have any of that info by then. So if you have to decide between Ahmed and Duke Johnson, DeAndre Swift, Antonio Gibson, Zeke and Connor, and probably even J.K. Dobbins, just because of the Lamar Jackson effect. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, people. That game got canceled, so this is what happens when you don't edit your notes. Not sure what's going to happen with the QB situation in Miami, but I think the only guy in the passing game I'd be comfortable with is Devontae Parker. Next up, we got the Browns at the Jaguars. Should be a huge game for Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Jarvis Landry and Rashad Higgins are both, they're probably both starts here. Jags have allowed the 6th most receiving yards to wide receivers, but I think they're going to just run the hell out of the ball, so I might consider other options besides the Browns receivers. Harrison Bryant, I think, is a must-start in this matchup as well. Jags have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends this year, and Harrison Bryant is the guy that they look to in the end zone. He, they have Austin Hooper there, but Bryant seems to be the guy that they like. What are we? The Browns have allowed the 8th fewest rushing yards this year, but I'm still starting James Robinson. He had just over 100 total yards on 19 touches last week against the Steelers. Jake Luton should have an easier time against the Browns than he did against the Steelers. The Browns are in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers and top 3 against tight ends. So DJ Shark is a must-start, and Keelan Cole and Tyler Eifert are options for us this week, but I'm staying away from them if I have other options. Saints at Broncos. Alvin Kamara is obviously still a must-start despite his first game of his career without a catch last week, which I thought was crazy when I heard that stat. Michael Thomas had 12 of the 23 targets last week against the Falcons. There were some concerns that Michael Thomas's target share might go down with Taysom Hill under center, but that was not the case. So he should continue to be just fine with Taysom at quarterback. Manny Sanders had a 40-plus yard touchdown called back, which would have given him over 100 yards and a touchdown, but I'm not starting him in this game. The Broncos' pass defense is much better than the Falcons. And Jared Cook had the best tight end matchup last week and only caught one ball, so I'm not starting him either. Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay had the most even split of touches they've had all year last week against the Dolphins. Gordon had 15 carries, Lindsay had 16. They each had about 85 yards, but Gordon got the 2 touchdowns and neither had a single target. The Saints' run D is really good, so don't expect too much from these guys this week. But it was encouraging to see, if you're a Phillip Lindsay owner, him get almost an exact split with Melvin Gordon. Tim Patrick had over 100 yards last week, while Jerry Jeudy only had 37, and they each had 8 targets. Jeudy only caught 3 balls. Patrick caught 5, and actually had a higher ADOT of a full yard more than Jerry Jeudy, which is usually what we don't. It's not what we usually see. Jerry Jeudy is usually the guy that gets those air yards. I'd say they're both boom or bust flex plays, but Patrick might be a little safer because he seems to have slightly better hands. Next game, 49ers at Rams. So we've got some question marks around Raheem Mostert. Not sure if he's going to be cleared to play in this game or not, but we're starting Deebo Samuels and Brandon Ayuk, Cooper Kupp, and Robert Woods. They both had crazy games last week, so you're obviously playing both of those guys. Then these running backs for the Rams, Malcolm Brown, Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson, I think they're all sits. The 49ers aren't as good as the Buccaneers run D, but they're still pretty damn good. With the 3 of them splitting all the touches and it being a tough matchup, I think I'm sitting all 3 Ram running backs. I'm also sitting the Rams tight ends. The 49ers are one of 7 teams to only allow 1 or 2 touchdowns to tight ends so far this season. San Fran is the second hardest matchup for tight ends, so stay away from those Rams tight ends this week. Chiefs at Buccaneers. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, toughest matchup for running backs, but you can't sit him. I have him in 2 leagues, and I'm still starting him, but I will possibly be looking at Clyde's rushing prop to go under. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill are obvious starts. I'm sitting Le'Veon Bell. Scored last week, but only 25 yards on 7 carries, and I've outlined it numerous times how the Buccaneers' run defense is historically good. The under rushing yards and under receiving yard props for all 3 Ram running backs hit last week. So I will 100% be sitting Le'Veon Bell and be looking to take the under on his rushing yard prop. Leonard Fournette scored last week, but only had 26 yards on 7 carries and 4 targets. Jones wasn't any better. Ronald Jones only 24 yards on 10 carries, didn't catch his only target. It's scary for sure, but unless you have other options that are guaranteed to get more touches than these guys, I would still flex Ronald Jones, and I think Fournette is a low-end RB2 in PPR leagues because he's getting those targets. And then obviously the wide receivers and the tight end, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Gronk, can't start it. You can't sit any of those guys either. So Browns at Packers. Not sure if Nick Foles is going to be cleared to play in this one, but I don't think it's really going to matter. David Montgomery has one of the best matchups in fantasy football here. The Packers have allowed the 4th most rushing TDs this season. He has cleared concussion protocol and will be playing in this game, so definitely get him in your lineup. Allen Robinson is the man in Chicago, so we're still starting him. And then it's a particularly special game for Jimmy Graham because of revenge. Yes, played on the Packers last year before he was not released. I think they just didn't re-sign him. Then you got Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a start because of his downfield targets, and maybe Robert Tonyan caught another TD last week. Bears have allowed the 6th most receptions to tight ends, so maybe I might be looking at his TD prop, might be looking at his reception prop. I'm not sure yet. And the last game of the week, Monday Night Football, we got Seahawks at the Eagles. Chris Carson is expected to play. Eagles have allowed the 7th most rushing yards over the last 3 games, so I'm definitely starting Chris Carson if he's active. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are both monsters, so you're going to play them. Miles Sanders, Jalen Reagor, Dallas Goedert, and I think even Travis Fulgham has one more opportunity for us. Only had 1 catch for 8 yards in each of his last 2 games, despite seeing 12 targets in those 2 games combined. But, this pass defense for the Seahawks is as bad as it gets, so I think he's worth another shot here. So that's going to do it for the matchups. Let's take a second here, and we'll bring up the Week 12 podcast picks. So last week I went 4-4 with one of my TD scorers missing the game. I had DeAndre Swift to score, and then he was inactive with that concussion. So finished the week 4-4, which bumped me below 60%. So I got to get back on track here if I want to finish this season above 60%. So let's get into these picks. I had the Texans minus 2.5 at the Lions was my first podcast pick, which I released yesterday on the Thanksgiving episode. So if you missed that, I'm sorry, but you got to keep up on this stuff, guys. There was no Kenny Golladay, no real running game for the Texans. I think I was pretty confident in Deshaun Watson going off on Turkey Day, and I had the over in his passing yards. It was like 297, and I think he finished with 315 or 316 or something. So nice little prop bet hit for me that on Thanksgiving. The next bet is going to be the Browns minus 6.5 at the Jaguars. The Jags have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to running backs, the 2nd most to tight ends, the 6th most to wide receivers, and the 3rd most to quarterbacks. So they are just all around not good. They have the 6th lowest yards per game and the 5th fewest points per game. So I think the Browns go down to Florida and put a whooping on the Jags. The Browns' last 3 games have all been in either wind, rain, or both. So we really haven't got the chance to see this offense kind of open things up since OBJ went down. And I think this is the game we see Jarvis Landry and Rashad Higgins and all those tight ends put up some points. So the Browns defense isn't great by any means, but this rookie quarterback for the Jags has shown he's really not all that great at anything except for this the deep ball. He does have a pretty good arm, but again, if you have no accuracy, I don't care if you could throw the ball to the moon. So give me the Browns by a touchdown here in this game against the Jags. And the third pick is going to be the Raiders minus 2.5 at the Falcons. The Raiders have looked pretty damn good over the last handful of games since their 8-point win in Kansas City in Week 5. They've won an ugly weather game in Cleveland back, and then they won back-to-back division games, and then they took the Chiefs down to the last possession in the second meeting between the two last week. So the Falcons have been one of the most inconsistent teams in the league, and Julio Jones is dealing with that hamstring injury. Matt Ryan has always been subpar when he doesn't have Julio Jones. So I think the Raiders can go into Atlanta and steal a 3-point win. So give me the Raiders by 2.5. Then my over of the week is going to be Seahawks at Eagles, over 50. The number shocked me, to be completely honest. The Seahawks games have finished with an average of 60.5 points so far this year. They've only had 2 games this year that have finished under 50 total points. And they were the last 2 Seahawks games, both division games, which makes sense because your division teams know you best. So the Seahawks average 30 points a game on the road, with the Eagles putting up 23 points a game at home. This game is in Philadelphia. The return of Chris Carson does worry me a bit because I think we'll see the Seahawks maybe run the ball a bit more, try and keep the offense a little more balanced than they have been over these past few weeks. But as long as Carson Wentz doesn't turn the ball over 5 times like he seems to do in every game, I think we'll see this game go over. Just got to get like 24 points from the Eagles. Maybe just 21 points might be enough. So give me the Seahawks and the Eagles over 50 points. My under for the week, I was looking at the 2 New York teams, but I think I'm going to go with the Jets at the Dolphins, under 44.5. The Jets got shut out by the Dolphins in Week 6. They're scoring the fewest amount of points per game right now with 15. Ryan Fitzpatrick started that game the first time they played, but this time it will be Tua Tagovailoa. Say what you want about the Jets, but I think Greg Williams and the defense can do enough to keep this rookie QB and the Dolphins offense from having a big game. I see this as a 24-10, maybe 27-17 type of game. The Jets have scored over 17 points in only 3 games this year, so I don't think they're really going to contribute too much to the total. So give me the Jets and the Dolphins under 44.5. My 3 TD scorers of the week, I'm going to go with Dalvin Cook as my number 1 guy. The Panthers have given up 12 touchdowns to running backs already. Cook has scored in every game but 1 this year. It's a chalky pick, but I'm not sure if there's a TD prop I'm more confident in this week than Dalvin Cook. Chris Carson will most likely be making his return this week. The Eagles are one of 7 teams to have allowed 10 or more rushing TDs so far this season. I think the Seahawks are going to look to start using the run game just a little bit more as we keep getting closer to the playoffs. So give me Chris Carson to score. And then the wide receiver that I like, Darius Slayton. He hasn't scored since week 6. He leads the Giants in air yards by a lot, almost by like 3 times. The Bengals have allowed the 3rd most explosive plays to wide receivers this year, and with the injury to Joe Burrow, I think the Bengals are going to come out flat and uninspired. I think this is a game that Slayton easily gets behind the defense for a deep shot or 2, and hopefully he scores. So that's the 3 TD scorer props. So let's take a second and drop in the road dog of the week, baby.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody.
All right, so road dog of the week for week 12. Yeah, week 12. I'm going to go with the Los Angeles Chargers getting 5.5 points at the Buffalo Bills. The Chargers scare me because they seem to not really be able to finish games. They let teams that they should dominate just stick around way too long like they did with the Jets last week. But with only 6 road underdogs to pick from this week, I think the Chargers have the best chance to win this game. I was thinking of using the Washington football team as my road dog, but I didn't want to take 2 picks from the Thanksgiving Day game, so I went with number 2, which is the Chargers getting 5.5. 5 of the Chargers' 7 losses were by 5 points or less. So give me the Superchargers getting 5.5 points against the Bills as the road dog of the week for week number 12. That's going to do it for the podcast picks for week number 12, and that's going to do it for the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving weekend. Make sure you check us out next week. We only got 13, 14, 15. We only got 4 weeks left in this fantasy season, so let's finish strong here, and may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.
now streaming.
Show me the one whose safety deemed such destruction.
The phenomenon returns to Disney+.
You must reunite it with its own kind.
Stream the new season of The Mandalorian.
Where?
This you must determine.
The award-winning saga continues.
You know this is no place for a child. Wherever I go, he goes. So I've heard.
The Mandalorian. New season now streaming. Only on Disney+. 18+ subscription required. T's and C's apply.
Rewarding your staff this Christmas? With One for All gift cards, you can gift anything from €15 to €500, completely tax-free. And you're supporting retail in Ireland. Accepted in over 11,000 outlets nationwide, like Tesco, Argos, Woodies, Boots, Currys, and online. Order at oneforallrewards.ie or place a corporate order at your local post office, and you could win a daily prize worth over €100. Terms and conditions apply. The One for All gift card is issued by GVS Prepaid Europe Limited. GVS Prepaid Europe Limited is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.